All right. We're talking about Hammurabi, king of Babylon. Now, I want to refer to von Clausewitz. Have any of you heard the name von Clausewitz? Von Clausewitz, 200 years ago, wrote a book which is a classic. It's called On War, yes, von Kriege. He wrote a book on war. And in it he makes a very important statement which has been, accepted as the reality. And he said, war is another aspect of diplomacy. And diplomacy is another aspect of war. What you can't get, it's an extension of it. What you can't get by diplomacy, you will eventually try to get by war. And what you can't get by war, or you think you can't get it by war, you'll try to get by diplomacy. They're two sides of one coin. One of the most brilliant practitioners of this art of von Clausewitz was Hammurabi of Babylon. You never knew him because he lived only 3,000 years earlier. But the fact is, when we know about the career of Hammurabi, and there was a brilliant diplomatic military tactician. And there were others in history who were similarly successful in being able to balance the needs of diplomacy and the needs of going to war at the proper time. And there were those who failed because they miscalculated. And the two greatest failures, of course, in modern times were Napoleon and Hitler. Napoleon made a great mistake when, before he had consolidated his total control over Europe, he decided to invade Russia. And of course, that was the end. In the case of Hitler, he miscalculated. By the way, when Hitler made his treaty with Stalin, the non-aggression pact of August 1939, he planned to attack Russia after it had served his purpose. This was a non-aggression friendship pact between the Soviet Union, Russia, and Germany. At the same time, Hitler was telling some of his people, when things are settled, then he's going to attack Russia. So he was lying at the time, but that was not the problem, because the diplomats and politicians lie anyway. The important thing was that he miscalculated. The great mistake in the invasion of Russia was the fact that it did in June 22nd, which was the mistake, but let's leave that. To point out the failures is not our purpose. The purpose here is to analyze Hammurabi of Babylon. Now, Hammurabi ruled for 42 years. He was the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty. We have the whole list of all the kings of the first Babylonian dynasty. Among the texts that were discovered, of course, the great one was the Code of Hammurabi, which we'll discuss later. It was discovered almost complete, and the missing parts were replaced by the copies that were made at his time. There were letters written by Hammurabi, interesting letters which display his involvement in the economy and in the politics of the country. The most interesting was this particular thing, which is the year list of Hammurabi, the date formula. What's important about that? Most of the kings of Babylonia and Assyria kept lists of their reigns, in addition to the historical records. I mean, they had historical records, and especially the Assyrians, they tell about their campaigns. And Sargon-of-Akkad wrote about his military campaigns. And of course, many of them write about their building projects, like Udea of Lagash and Nebuchadnezzar. But what's interesting about the year lists is that they list the year and an important event of that year. So let's look at this beginning at the beginning here. Year 1, Hammurabi became king. Obviously, that's the important event. Year 2, he established justice in the country. That doesn't mean the code. The code of Hammurabi doesn't come until 1730. That is 30 years later, and we'll see why. Nevertheless, he established justice, and that may have been simply a formula. Then, number 3, he constructed a throne for the main dais of the god Nana in the temple of Kishir in Babylon. Are
these written concurrently, or are these written much later?
No, these are, the records are kept. And then they might have compiled the list from the records, but they always kept records, contemporary records. So therefore, you know, there may be things here that are not that important, but nevertheless they're in the record because they were the things that he declared. In fact, he said that this year, year 4, the wall of the sacred precinct of Gagia was built. That's what I wanted to record. Then he constructed the Enkash Bara and constructed the Seer of the Goddess Laws. Number 7. All right, let's see what happened here. Hammurabi is king of Babylon. At the same time, Shamshi-Adad I is king of Assyria. And Shamshi-Adad I has already conquered Eshnunna and Mari. So he is ruling over an empire. And we know the name of his son Ishme-Dagan, he made king of Eshnunna, and Yasmahadad he made king of Mari. And now the 3 kings under the emperor Shamshi-Adad are ruling the northern part of what is modern Iraq, namely Assyria and the 2 neighboring states. And in their correspondence, they're talking about, he says to his sons, beware of what he called Banu Yamina, which means the people of the south, those Babylonians. Keep watch on them. Because everyone knew the other one was his rival. And since Shamshi-Adad had already established his empire in the north, Hammurabi of Babylon was probably very wary. I mean, what happens now?